let me do something different here, because I'm going to admit something to you folks. My slides are set up so different than these slides. And these slides provoke a lot of questions that I think we could avoid if we just did something a little bit different. So I want to stop for a second, and I'm going to show you something. And I'm just going to talk to you for a minute. I want you to forget the slides. I don't even want you to worry about the slides for about the next 15 minutes as I just talk to you. Yeah, let me pull this up. Okay, take a deep breath, okay? This is called the exclusive right to sell listing agreement. And I think that this will really help you. Now, please understand that this is something that you could see on both the national and the state portion. We talk about the exclusive right to sell listing agreement. Now, I'm going to stop before I go any further and explain that we have 3 different types of listing agreements that are testable. So here's one of them. And I just want to touch on a couple points in here. Yeah, the slides, honestly, I would rather teach this class without slides, but some of you are visual people, and I completely get it. So let me just start. I want to read you this first paragraph right here, and listen to it. This exclusive right to sell listing agreement is entered into between blank as the seller of the property, described below, and blank as the listing firm. Here, the individual agent who signs this agreement shall. Now that goes back to general agency, right? The agent, the licensee who signs this on behalf of the firm is binding the firm. So that makes you a general agent of your firm. Shall, on behalf of the firm, be primarily responsible for ensuring that the firm's duties hereunder are fulfilled. However, it is understood and agreed that other agents of the firm may be assigned to fulfill such duties if deemed appropriate by the firm. For the purposes of this agreement, the term firm, as the context may require, shall be deemed to include the individual agent who signs this agreement and any other agents of the firm. So let's just talk for a minute, okay? If I was hired by a seller, I would sign this listing agreement with them, and that would make my brokerage firm their agent. And here's the thing. At the time that we sign this, there is an option for them to authorize what we call dual agency. Well, I'm going to explain dual agency actually in about 30 seconds. But if they authorize dual agency or they don't authorize dual agency is kind of irrelevant to begin with. I want you to think for a second how these relationships go. Do you think that when we're talking about a home being listed by an agent of XYZ Realty, they could have had a relationship for a day, they could have had a relationship for 6 months, you agree? Could a home sit on the market for 6 months and we have been the listing agent of the seller for 6 months? Sure. Well, what about a buyer agency agreement, right? Could we sign a buyer agency agreement with a buyer and it be our first day? Or could we have been showing them homes for 6 months? Yeah. So I want you to think about that concept. If I listed Jean's house at 123 Main Street, and it has been on the market for 6 months, And Gene and I signed an exclusive right to sell listing agreement. Well, remember what I told you. This word exclusive means Gene can't work with anybody else so long as this agreement is active. But can we all agree that I also promised that I was going to give Gene exclusive representation up until the time I couldn't? So if no buyers from my firm ever come to see Gene's listing, I have given Gene, ABC has given Gene exclusive seller representation for the past 6 months. Does that statement make sense? The only person I care about their well-being is Gene. You agree? Not any of the buyers who have shown the house. Well, here's the epiphany I need you to have. And I'm just going to put my name over here, and I'm going to add somebody else. If Ebony, and we'll look at it in a second, signs a buyer agency agreement with Tiffany, and they also work for ABC. And they've gone out for 6 months trying to find Tiffany a home. And Tiffany has only seen listings that are listed by other real estate firms, cooperating firms, XYZ, EXP, Keller Williams, Coldwell Banker. Everybody following along here? Can we all agree that Gene has got an exclusive representation from ABC for the past 6 months? Can we all agree that Tiffany has gotten exclusive representation from ABC for the past 6 months? We've never had any conflict of interest. Our loyalties have always been to that one party because they have nothing to do with each other. But the second that Tiffany sees Gene's house and wants to see it, that's dual agency. So now ABC is not giving exclusive representation anymore if we do this transaction. ABC is giving divided representation. We are trying to represent two parties with competing interests. So when we say exclusive representation, we mean our loyalties are 1,000% to you with no conflict of interest. Now let me give you another aha moment. Let's say that Gene did agree to authorize dual agency. Folks, I'm going to give you the definition of dual agency right now. Dual agency is when the buyer and the seller are represented by the same firm in the same transaction. In the same transaction. That is the definition of dual agency. The buyer and the seller are represented in the same firm by the same firm in the same transaction. So even if Gene had authorized dual agency though, he just was saying it's okay for it to happen. But please understand, just saying it's okay for it to happen doesn't mean that we're automatically dual agents. We are not until it arises. So for 6 months, even though Gene authorized dual, I was exclusively representing Gene's best interest. Everybody okay still so far? Well, let's say that Tiffany authorized dual. She said it was fine. I understand that if there's a listing in your firm that I want to see, that you would have to switch to dual. Well, if that never happened, then even if she authorized dual, Tiffany had exclusive representation from our firm for the past 6 months. But the second that Tiffany wants to see Gene's house, neither one of them has exclusive representation anymore. They did for 6 months. There was never a conflict of interest. But now there is. Because the same firm is representing the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. Tiffany wants to buy Gene's 123 Main Street. So when we say exclusive representation, it doesn't mean single agency. It means there's no conflict of interest. There is only one person that we're loyal to in that relationship. Erica says, what are the negatives of dual agency? Hang tight. I'm just going to table a couple things until we get there. Is everybody okay with what I just said?
Just to clarify, both buyer and seller have to sign an agreement for dual agency to be allowed. In this, as you said, in the same transaction for both buyer and seller to be represented by the firm, they would both have to agree to it.
They would absolutely both have to agree to it. So I'm just going to keep talking to you. I don't want to... There's one flaw with what you said, Patrick, from a testable point of view. When we say dual agency in North Carolina, you have to have what is called informed and written consent to work as a dual agent. However, there is one caveat that is highly testable. In North Carolina, you can operate with a buyer under what's called an oral buyer agency agreement. An oral buyer agency agreement. And so if you have oral consent to be a buyer agent with somebody, and I'm going to explain oral buyer agency in a minute, you could also have oral consent to do dual agency from that buyer. Because you don't have a written agreement with them yet, it would be impossible to get written consent. So in other words, if you are operating as an oral buyer agent and they want to see a home listed by your firm, you would have to let them know that that was dual agency and ask if they authorize it. And if they verbally authorize it, you could show that home. But it would still have to be reduced to writing at the time that you had to reduce the buyer agency agreement to writing. And we'll talk about that in just a second. So, before I go any further, okay, I just want to keep talking with you because I feel like some of these slides can get you going down a rabbit hole, okay? I already explained to you about this historical agency thing and the way that this all goes. And so now I'm going to start explaining to you the real world. Pia, I just want to make sure your hand's just up from before, right, Pia?
Yeah, sorry, I'll take it down.
No worries. What you got, Malvina?
I just want to get this clear in my mind because this is where I mess up at when it comes to this exclusive. It only to be dual agency, it has to be in the same firm.
Correct.
It can't be outside.
Mm-hmm.
And exclusive is, that you owe the fiduciary duties to your client at that point, and then nobody else could sell them. They directly to you for the exclusive.
Your loyalties are very one-sided, right? Like if we say exclusive, your loyalties are only to one person.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's.
Let me tell you what you need to be aware of on the test, so we're all on the same page here. Because I'm going to make sure we all understand this. If we say buyer agent, the buyer is exclusively represented. If we say seller's agent, the seller is exclusively represented. Because if we were representing both, we could not say buyer agent or seller's agent. We would then just say what?
Customer?
Dual.
Oh, dual.
Dual. Folks, if you see the word buyer agent, all you need to know is the only person we give a shit about is the buyer. If you see seller's agent, the only person we give a shit about is the seller. If we care about both, it's not called buyer agency or seller agency. It's called dual. Just saying the word buyer agency tells us that we only have loyalties to the buyer. Saying the word seller agency tells us that we only have loyalties to the seller. The second that we have the conflict of interest arise, it's called dual. We can't call it buyer agency and seller agency anymore. What you got, Lisa?
Well, you're saying that it is a conflict of interest, so obviously it's a conflict of interest, so it doesn't make sense that there is a dual agency. But, I mean, I see that, you know, there's a listing and somebody's interested in it. I get that. So they're like, okay, this is the only house that I've seen, but it's obviously by the same agency that you've already signed with. But we really can't disclose to the buyer at this point because of confidentiality. So where is the positives for having a dual agency?
Hang tight. Folks, at this point, I honestly am just going to have to table a lot of questions because it confuses people, right? I'm not saying that they're not good questions. You're just not there yet. All will be revealed, I promise. All will be revealed. Hang tight.
So you're like Oz?
Yeah, all will be revealed. That's right. I'm just like Oz. Only I don't have a curtain. Actually, I do. I have like a green screen over here. I'm going to be behind that. I want to just clarify a couple of things. I want to show you something because I've got a couple other slides that I think can be helpful here. When I say buyer agency, it means that the broker exclusively represents the buyer in the transaction, as I just stated. So when we're talking about buyer agency, right, that the relationship with a buyer, in North Carolina, I told you, it can be oral. All right, and I'm going to explain this in just a second. If you think about oral buyer agency, can you imagine meeting a broker to go see a home that you just found online, and you show up, and the second you get there, they start yelling at you to sign a piece of paper before they show a house? It might make you feel a little uncomfortable, right? So because of the nature of building rapport with somebody, we do have the option to work as a oral buyer agent. But there are certain very specific things you need to know from a test taking point of view with oral buyer agency. And here's the two. Oral buyer agency agreements are non-exclusive, there's that word again, and open-ended. Okay? The reason why this is so important is because a written agency agreement has to have a definite termination date. It's required by law. You cannot have an open-ended listing agreement or buyer agency agreement that's in writing. It can be for 3 months, 6 months, 10 days, 12 years, but it has to have a date. Okay? But oral buyer agency agreements are just an at-will thing. So let me give you a scenario here. Okay? I'm just going to start talking and painting pictures because it'll start making more sense. If Eric calls me up as a consumer and says, Seth, I just found you on Zillow. I want to see 123 Main Street. Well, I'm going to meet Eric at 123 Main Street, but I'm going to start giving you like everything, okay? Let's just give you the scenario, and I'm going to give you everything. When I meet Eric, he is a consumer, and he wants to see a home that is listed for sale. So that tells me that he's probably interested in buying. You agree? Well, in North Carolina, we have an agency disclosure called the Working with Real Estate Agents disclosure. And the most testable rule for that disclosure is at first substantial contact. We would have to stop the consumer from saying anything confidential and disclose how agency works in North Carolina. Now, the view of the North Carolina Real Estate Commission is if you are showing somebody a home, you're at that point. Because we really shouldn't be showing them a home unless they're qualified for it. And how do I know they're qualified unless I'm talking confidential information? Does that statement make sense? So I'm going to meet Eric at this home. And because he wants to see it, I'm going to say, well, Eric, listen, before I show you this home, have you gotten a pre-approval? But I can't really ask him that because I've got to tell him. I said, but before you answer that, Eric, let me explain this agency disclosure in North Carolina. I'm going to say, Eric, do understand that in North Carolina, you can have a buyer's agent who is somebody that is loyal to you and looks out for your best interests and tries to get you the best possible outcome as you're endeavoring to buy. Eric, also understand that you could be working with somebody who is called a dual agent, which means that they would owe loyalties to you and the seller. Of dual, we have something called designated dual agency, which I'm not going to give you too much about that yet because it's coming. Eric, also understand that you can be unrepresented as a buyer. You do not have to have representation. Do you get this, Eric? And Eric says, yeah. Okay. Well, this working with real estate agents disclosure is a written disclosure. This is very important, highly testable. It is a written disclosure, an actual piece of paper that I'm going to show you in a minute. So I would provide this form to Eric, and I go over these things with him, and I want you to think of the agency disclosure as a menu. It is a menu, a menu. If somebody tells you what the menu has, have you made a choice yet? No. So here is one of the most important things I need you to understand, or you will screw yourself on the test. I went over this agency disclosure with Eric, but it did not form a relationship with Eric. I told him what the options were. That's it. Does that make sense for everybody? If you don't get that through your head, you are screwed. An agency disclosure only gives you the information. It tells you what's available, but it does not give you you haven't made a choice, right? We're not in a relationship yet. So I give Eric this disclosure and he signs it. Signing it just means that I've reviewed it with him. This is a very important thing in North Carolina. You have to review this with a consumer so they know what the options are. Think about what you've learned in 2.5 days of being in class. It's very different than you ever thought it was already, isn't it? So it would not be fair to just start working with people. Folks, if I met Eric and didn't give him this disclosure and I just started showing him houses, what is that? What would we call that?
Customer.
Implied agency.
Implied agency, which is illegal. We don't ever want to try to suggest by our actions that we're working with somebody if we're not. Implied agency is illegal in North Carolina. So I go over this list of options with Eric and I explain the different things. And then I say, well, Eric, I'd love to be your buyer's agent. Remember what I told you. In North Carolina, you cannot work with people unless you represent somebody. Well, I'm not the listing agent, so I don't work for the seller. So I'm going to say, Eric, I'd love to be your buyer's agent. And if Eric says yes, we could operate under an oral buyer agency agreement. I said, well, Eric, normally we need written agency agreements, but because you are a buyer, we're going to have what's called an oral buyer agency agreement. But let me give you another very important word for an oral buyer agency agreement. They're what we called express. Now, here's another mini lesson for you. Express means stated. That's it. It can be in writing. It can be verbally stated. It just has to be stated. Because yet again, if I don't explain our relationship to him and I start showing him houses, that's implied again. We don't do implied. So let me give you an example of an express oral buyer agency agreement. Eric, we have written agreements, okay? But I know that may make you uncomfortable, so we can operate under an oral buyer agency agreement. Listen, Eric, I know you want to see homes in the Wake County and surrounding areas. You set up to $400,000, and I'm happy to show you those. In our oral buyer agency agreement, I am going to be loyal to you and represent your best interest. If you want to put an offer in on a home, Eric, we would have to reduce the oral buyer agency agreement to a written buyer agency agreement because I legally can't submit an offer for you without a written buyer agency agreement. Understand, Eric, that if you want to see a home that is listed by my brokerage firm, that would be considered dual agencies, and my firm's loyalties would be divided between you and the seller. Of that, we could practice designated. Yet again, if you authorize this and you want to put an offer in on a home, we would have to reduce this dual agency consent to writing as well. Does that make sense, Eric? Are you okay with all this? Eric says, yeah. The only other piece that I didn't add is compensation, right? I'd say, well, Eric, if we get you under contract on a home, I expect to make 2.4, 2.53%, whatever I intend to make. That is what an express oral buyer agency agreement looks like. And because now I have loyalties to somebody, who do I have loyalties to? Say it again.
There.
Eric. So Eric is now my client. Do you agree? And I am now representing him. More specifically, my firm is, but I'm working with him, so don't get it confused, right? He is my client. He is my firm's client. Everybody following along? So I show Eric 123 Main Street as his buyer's agent. And it's listed with a different firm. Eric wants to put in an offer. So we write a written buyer agency agreement because we'd have to reduce it to writing. So he signs a written buyer agency agreement. Okay. And then we put in an offer. It's a different firm. I was hired by Eric. Eric's the buyer. I'm a buyer agent. My firm's a buyer agent. Eric is getting exclusive representation from the word go. I have zero conflict of interest ever because I don't give two craps about the seller. I only care about Eric's well-being. Everybody okay with that scenario? Well,
I have a question going back to implied. So when you said he has an oral agreement, and you can show him the properties based on the fact that he has an oral agreement.
Yep.
If he goes to make an offer, then he has to be reduced to a written agreement.
Yep.
Where did you get implied in that? Because if he's showing, how is he acting when he can to do it because it's an oral agreement? Where's the implication?
No. You misunderstood. If we didn't have an oral agency agreement and I just started showing him houses, that would be an implied agreement. My actions suggest that I'm his agent. Once we have an express oral buyer agency agreement, meaning we stated it, and he agrees, I'm his agent. That's not implied, right? So you misunderstood. If you started showing houses without doing this, that would be implied.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and give you everything you need to know about this oral buyer agency agreement because now we're getting to some questions that I can answer, right? We're grasping this concept and you're thirsting for more knowledge. I can help you with that. So let me ask a question here to help you folks understand an oral buyer agency agreement because they are testable in North Carolina, okay? And I'm going to ask you a question, and please don't anybody get uncomfortable, okay? This is going to sound weird, but I'm not hitting on anybody. It's just a scenario that I like to use. Are any of you young ladies in here, and when I say young ladies, I mean any ladies in here, any of you ladies single in here? Give me a thumbs up if you are. And you're volunteering to be an example if you are. Mackenzie, you're the first one I saw. Mackenzie, we're about to have some fun, okay? Mackenzie, here's the deal, okay? Mackenzie is single. Can we all agree that if Mackenzie leaves class today and is bored out of her mind, she can hop on her phone and look at Tinder or Bumble or whatever dating app she wants to look at. Can we agree on that? Mackenzie's a strong, independent woman. She can do what she wants, so I don't judge her, okay? So Mackenzie gets on Tinder and she starts swiping right on all these handsome menses, okay? There's lots of handsome menses. And she's swiping right on them. And I'm just going to put some letters here because I always forget who I use. So we're going to say she matches with Marco, with Brian, with Thomas, and with Zach. Marco, Brian, Thomas, Zach. Marco, Brian, Thomas, Zach. Can we all agree that when she matches and starts chatting with Marco, Brian, Thomas, and Zach, that she could schedule a lovely date dinner with Marco, a sushi date with Brian, you know, some hibachi with Thomas, and hell, they're going French dining with Zach. Could Mackenzie go on dates with all of these men?
Go, Mackenzie.
Go on with your bad self, Mackenzie. Get them dinners, girl, right? Do it to it. Folks, that's called Go ahead, Mackenzie. Which one's your favorite? Which meal are you going for? Which is your favorite?
I'll take Zach. He sounds fancy.
Zach sounds fancy. You're going French. Okay, we're not there yet, though. So hang tight. She's leaning towards Zach right now. If Mackenzie goes out to dinner with all these men, we call it dating. Okay? And dating is completely okay. Because what are you ultimately trying to do? Well, number one, she may just be trying to get free dinner. But could she be trying to find the love of her life? And don't you got to get to know some people to feel comfortable with them to see if they're going to be the person you want to be in a relationship with? You agree? So Mackenzie goes out on dates with all of these guys for weeks, trying to figure out, because they're all okay-ish, but she just hasn't, really felt it yet. Well, after about 3 weeks, she decides it's Zach. There you go, Brittany. Now is the time for Travis's song, right? Some hoes in this house. Yeah, y'all don't judge Mackenzie. She's just living her best life, okay? Listen. Could, after like 3 weeks of dating all these guys, Mackenzie decides that Zach's the one, right? She really builds this connection with Zach. And so what's she going to do? She's going to make it Facebook official. They're now in a relationship. Well, let me ask you a question. If they are in a relationship, if she was Facebook official with Zach, would she be in trouble if she continued to go out to dinner with Marco, Brian, and Thomas? Yeah. There's one always in the bunch, CJ. There's always somebody who's like, well, they're not married. I'm like, they're in a relationship, right? Marriage or not, they're in a relationship. If it makes you feel better, we'll just say that Mackenzie's crazy and she got married to Zach the day of. If it makes it strong enough for you folks, she's married to Zach, right? She just got married to him. Now can she go out to dinner with these folks? No, that's a problem. But can we all agree that if she never marries Zach, that she could ghost all of them and never go out to dinner with any of them? Again, can we all agree that she doesn't have to tell Marco, Brian, or Thomas that she married Zach? She can just ghost them. Oral buyer agency is exactly like this. It is dating. It is to build rapport. It is to feel comfortable. And understand that just like this dating scenario, there's no time frame that we have to date. We can go on one date and never talk again. We can go on 500 dates and then never talk again. We can go on one date and then be in a relationship. We can go on 500 dates and never talk again. So oral buyer agency is non-exclusive. You cannot limit them to only work with you. It's just like dating. Can you imagine on date one, right? She just meets Marco and Marco's like, you can't see other men, it's me. She's going to get a restraining order and never call Marco again, right? Like she just met the guy. That would be crazy. This is how oral buyer agency works. There is no set period of time that we have to date. And there is no way that you can stop me from dating other people if I'm this buyer in an oral buyer agency agreement. So we say that they are open-ended, no time frame, and non-exclusive. Cannot bind me to you. Does that make sense? So let me translate this to real estate. Mackenzie could have an oral buyer agency agreement with Marco, Brian, Thomas, and Zach and go see 10 homes here, 20 homes here, 15 homes here, 5 homes here. And once she signs a written buyer agency agreement with Zach, Zach's the one getting paid. Sucks to suck. Doesn't matter how many homes you guys showed her. You never made a relationship official. You were just dating. That is oral buyer agency. Does that make sense? Thank you for being my example, Mackenzie. Zach sounds like a swell guy. I hope it works out.
Keep you posted.
Yeah, please do. Yes, that is oral buyer agency, okay? You got to put a ring on it, right? We got to make it official. Otherwise, we're screwed, right? But here's the one last thing I'll say before I send you to lunch. Do understand that all these guys were pathetic. Every single one of them wanted Mackenzie to marry them, right? Because they were her agent. She was not loyal to us, but we were pathetic, right? We're like, no, we love you. Please marry us, right? Every single one of us wants to marry Mackenzie because we're her agent, right? So she's not loyal to us, but we have to be loyal to her. We have to give her old car, even though it's just an oral agreement. Conrad says, how's implied agency used in the dating context? We'll talk about that a little bit when we get back from lunch. I'm about to let you go. Folks, also please understand that I have to be very careful when I teach this concept. I can't just say oral because this scenario gets really crazy really fast if I just say oral. I have to say oral buyer agency. Otherwise, I'm up here saying Mackenzie gives oral to Marco and oral to Brad and oral to Thomas and and it gets really weird really fast. So oral buyer agency is what you have to say. On that note, go enjoy your lunch. 12 o'clock, 12:45. I will shed light on everything. You'll be experts when we get back. I promise. We'll just take it slow. But y'all have a good lunch break. I will see you back in 12:45. So let's keep going where we left off. All right. I'm just going to continue talking to you because I feel like I can lay a better groundwork, and I would be the first to tell you that some of the verbiage you will see in some slides and some materials, and things of that nature can throw you for a loop. Like that word single agency, for all intents and purposes, you don't even really need to know the word single agency. You don't. What you need to know is who represents who and when. Okay, that's the biggest piece. So let me go back to a scenario for you, just so we're all on the same page here. Actually, let me revisit the earlier scenario. Remember when I was giving you this story about how brokerage used to work, right? Who did I say that every licensee worked for back in the day?
Seller.
The seller. But didn't I say that it came to pass that there were some people working from different brokerage firms, different firms, right, that were assisting buyers? In that scenario I gave, right, we assisted a buyer, and they thought they had representation because I was showing them all these terms. But who did I ultimately represent in that scenario?
Seller.
The seller. So I want you to think about something for a second. When I use the word subagent literally means agent of the agent. So in the relationships that I'm trying to help you folks understand, most relationships on the test and in the real world default to real estate brokerage firms. And so the most common use of the word subagent is all of the licensees of the firm. Everybody good with that? Well, I want you to understand that if I listed a home for Reginald, and I work for ABC Realty, right? ABC Realty is Reginald's agent, and yes, I'm a sub-agent of ABC. Everybody good with that statement? But if Lorenza was bringing me a buyer and not representing that buyer, I told you in North Carolina you can only represent one person or the other. So if Lorenza has a buyer for my listing with Reginald, who is the only person Lorenza could be representing?
The potential buyer. Buyer.
No, I'm telling you, Lorenza does not represent the buyer. But he's bringing me the buyer. We're going to work together and get this buyer under contract. So if he's not, say it again.
Seller.
The seller. Folks, there's only two parties to a sales transaction. You agree? There's the person buying real property. There's the person selling real property. So let me give you a scenario here. Here is one thing that is a very specific use of the word subagent. That is called a seller subagent. And this used to happen a lot, even before, and it still does after. Remember what I told you. Everybody got in trouble because nobody knew who was representing whom. Buyers thought they had representation, but they did not. Agents working with buyers thought that they were giving buyers representation, but they were not. Everybody had loyalties to the seller. even with a different firm. So let me just put, well, I'll pick a slide. Just so I can write this up on the board for you. Make sure we're on the same page. Actually, I'm just going to put a whiteboard up. That's what I'm going to do. Can everybody see this little whiteboard that just happened?
Yes.
Okay. So if we're dealing with, you can still see me and hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. Hopefully nothing bad happens. If so, I'll fix it very quick because as soon as I open Zoom's whiteboard, it says Zoom quit unexpectedly, which is not a good thing.
Recording in progress.
It's all right. Zoom did not like opening its own whiteboard. Apparently, Zoom has a glitch in its whiteboard. Y'all can see me and hear me again, though? Yeah, so I'm just going to do it a different way. Hang tight. Let me just go back to any old slide because I want to give you this visual here. Okay? In the scenario that I just gave, all right, I am listing a home, ABC, and I listed, I think, Reginald's home. Okay, but he's understanding this relationship now. Okay, I work for ABC. And Reginald hires me. Well, in reality, he hired ABC, and I'm a subagent of ABC. We're good. Okay? Well, Lorenza comes along with a buyer. It is possible, here's that word selling. It is possible for somebody to be assisting a buyer, to be working with a buyer, but to not be loyal to that buyer. And so this is what we would more specifically call seller subagency. Lorenza could call me up and say, Seth, I have a buyer interested in your listing. Can I show it? And I can agree to work with Lorenza in this scenario. So this is a very specific type of subagent called a seller subagent. Because we can all agree that if Lorenza has a buyer that he's working with, but not working for, the only other person that Lorenza could be working for is the seller, my seller, Reginald. Yes? Seller subagency. So this happened a lot. And please don't get confused, because if I was going to allow this to happen, yeah, I'm going to offer to compensate Lorenza for bringing me the buyer. Well, folks, this was common before everything went to hell and we had to introduce buyer agency, and it still exists after. The biggest thing that came from all of the things that went down is buyer agency was invented and disclosures now exist. So think back. Let me give you a scenario here. I used Eric before. Let me use somebody else. Melissa. Okay? If you call me up and you say, Seth, I found you on Zillow. I'd like to see 123 Main Street. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to meet Melissa at 123 Main Street. And based off the scenario I gave you before lunch, folks, what's the first thing I'm going to do with Melissa?
Explain buyer agency.
I'm going to explain agency to her, right? I'm going to give her this agency disclosure. And I'm going to give you a little more info on the disclosure in a minute. But understand that's the first thing, right? Because I have to tell her about these options. Well, I give her all these options, and then I say, remember, agency disclosure only tells somebody how it works, okay? It only tells them how it works. Menu of options. Think of it that way. And I say to Melissa, I would love to be your buyer's agent, and we can have a written buyer agency agreement from the get-go, or we can have an oral buyer agency agreement if a written one makes you uncomfortable. Everybody agree, based on what I told you before, that this is all true? Well, Melissa does this number right here. She says, oh, okay, oral buyer agency. Written buyer agency. Decisions. She says, actually, Seth, I watch HGTV and I've seen every episode of Selling Sunset. I don't think I need an agent. I just want to see the pretty house. Is that an option for her?
Yes.
Sure. We can all agree a consumer can choose to not be represented. Think back to all the examples of agency. You can go to court without an attorney, can't you? But here's the important piece to understand. If I'm showing her the home, can we all agree that that's something a broker, a real estate agent can do? Well, that means I have to have a relationship with somebody. In North Carolina, I cannot do brokerage activities at all unless I have a relationship with somebody. I have to have loyalties to somebody. Think back to fiduciary brokerage. So when Melissa says, Seth, I watch Selling Sunset, I don't need an agent. Could I still show Melissa this house?
As a sub-agent?
That's
No,
it.
you can't because there's no representation.
Well, here's the thing. There is no automatic representation. So you're both right. When she says, I don't want you to be my agent, I have to figure out a couple of things. Could I show this home? Yes, if and only if the listing firm authorizes me to act as what we call a seller subagent. So that means that the firm would have to give me permission to assist a buyer, but represent the seller. So think about this. What I'm saying is the seller hired XYZ, but this, oops, you unmuted. There we go. Let's fix that. The seller hired XYZ to represent them. But for some reason or another, the seller and XYZ have authorized other brokerages to also represent them by proxy. That is what we call seller subagency. Well, if you think about it, it makes good sense. What is my job as a listing agent representing a seller?
To get the house sold.
To sell the damn house. And if I don't have a buyer, then am I ever going to get paid? No. Everybody follow along here. So here's what would realistically happen, okay? Melissa says, I watch Selling Sunset and HGTV. I don't need an agent. So I'm going to say this to Melissa. Well, Melissa, that's great. I'm so glad. The only way that I can assist you, Melissa, and show you this home is if I am acting as a seller subagent. So when we go back to the agency disclosure, you will see that I would have to clearly state to her, Melissa, I do not represent you. I have no loyalties to you. Don't tell me anything confidential. I will take you to the cleaners. Does that make sense? That is what we call
her as a customer and not a client. Pretty much.
Correct. And this goes back to that word selling. I would be a selling agent because I'm trying to sell the house, but that doesn't mean that I'm loyal to the buyer. I am working with, I am assisting the buyer. Okay. Ultimately, I work for the seller. And that's what I'm going to get paid from. Everybody okay with everything thus far? What you got, Patrick?
Forgive me if I'm getting ahead or going on to something you're going to mention, but what if the ABC firm, the seller's agent, does not agree to a subagency or seller subagency?
Excellent question, and we can actually answer that question now. This one I will allow. So here's the deal. Patrick's question is, what if, in this scenario, right, that Melissa called me and she said she doesn't need an agent, and It means I can't be her buyer's agent. We all agree, because if she doesn't hire me, I'm never her agent. So my only option to show her this home is to be a seller subagent. Well, Patrick's question is, what if this firm does not authorize cooperating with seller subagents? That is their prerogative. And so if the listing firm is not going to cooperate with or compensate seller subagents, I'm going to look Melissa dead in the eyes. I'm going to say, sucks to suck, girl. Okay? Good luck. Why don't you go call this agent sign that's in the yard and see if they'll come show it to you? Because if I can't represent the buyer and I can't represent the seller, I'm not in it. I can't do anything. I can't even show her that house, even if I wanted to be a nice person. That's doing brokerage activity when I have nobody to represent. And you have to represent somebody. So does that happen, Patrick? Of course it does. Happens all the time. Seller subagency is where we're going to get into some squirrely stuff that I'm going to point out in like Learn, Test, Pass. And it's where Travis and I kind of had like a very big discussion about one of the questions that I didn't agree with. And I think you do need to know it, right? He said it was too much. I think you do need to know. So I'm going to explain it to you in just a minute. What you got, Ann?
Remind me, why were you there in that scenario with the buyer customer who elected not to be represented? Why were you there in the first place?
Because she found me on Zillow and said she wanted to see a house.
Okay. And so in that scenario, you, like, if that were to play out in real life, that could happen like in person. You could meet to see the property, and then before showing it, you would talk with her about that. And if in fact the listing firm did not allow for seller subagents, you would have to say, sorry, we're not going to be able to go inside.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's exactly right. Because think about it. If I just showed up and showed her this house, I have violated agency disclosure laws because I never told her how agency works. And I never established a relationship with her. You have to think about this from a very literal textbook law point of view. Have you ever had a scenario in real life where you probably just called somebody and got to go inside the house without hearing all this stuff? Yeah, but that wasn't legal. In the eyes of North Carolina, you have to represent somebody before you can do any brokerage activities, which means you should, at the very least, go to agency disclosure and form a relationship with somebody. And since I couldn't form a relationship with anybody, I'm out. Right? You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to say, well, Melissa, good luck calling the listing agent because they never answer their phone. And I'm going to go to the closest bar and take a shot of tequila and hope my day gets better because you just wasted my time, girl. You just wasted it. Right? That makes sense?
It's possible that a client like that or somebody like that was not interested anyway.
Well, it is possible for sure, especially when we get into the spiel that I could give this person. But I'm only giving you bits and pieces so far to make sure I understand the concepts, okay? What you got, Sam?
So why would a seller's agency ever agree to that? What benefit is there? Because can't they just have, so for that example, obviously the client doesn't want anyone to represent her. So in the end, obviously they wouldn't agree to that, because there'd be no benefit for them. She's gonna go directly to them anyway, if that makes sense.
Well, she may or she may not. You know, she may or she may not. I mean, I see what you're trying to ask. Why would somebody agree to compensate in this fashion? You can't get so caught up on ifs, buts, coconuts. Because at the end of the day, the listing firm is endeavoring to help the seller sell. That's it. If we have buyers, we're more likely to sell. Makes good sense. So if we don't offer compensation to a seller subagent who may have found a buyer, not get to represent that buyer, but they may have found one that is interested in buying our listing, that's how we get paid. We sell the house. Now, here's the thing, Sam. To your point, let me tell you a real world thing. If the listing firm wasn't going to offer me compensation, meaning they weren't going to allow me to act as a seller subagent, may I have called them and said, well, hey, I got some chick here who will not allow me to represent her. You're not offering any compensation to seller subagents. Would you give me a referral fee if I send her information to you, because I've got her information. She wants to buy your house, presumably. So then I could just go back to the listing agent, and then I would send Melissa's information, and I may at that point be able to, with direct authority, and this isn't going to be testable, by the way, this little piece right here that I'm about to say, could I potentially show the house to convenience the agent as part of a referral? Yes, right? So if the agent agrees to pay me a referral fee, could I be like, well, I'll show it to her, make sure she likes it, and if she likes it, I'll send you the referral agreement, and then you can work with her directly, right? But understand the important piece here. If Melissa was to call the listing agent and work with them directly, she's an unrepresented buyer working directly with the seller's agent. If Melissa worked with me as a seller subagent, she's an unrepresented buyer and she's working with somebody who directly represents the seller. It's really no different because my loyalties are to whom? The seller. Now let me explain this because I'm going a little bit in a different order than I normally do with this because y'all were just, I think it maybe is that y'all were just too sharp and y'all are asking too many advanced questions with not enough material to ask them, without it being super confusing. So I'm doing this completely different than I normally do, but I think y'all can handle it. Let's go back to that scenario, okay? Let's say that the firm authorized me to work as a seller subagent. So, do I have my slides up still? And I apologize if anybody put anything. I'm going to look at the chat in just a second because I see there's several of you putting some stuff in there. I just want to finish explaining some things here. Let's say, just to have with visual here, ABC is the listing firm. Means they represent whom? Seller. And I work for XYZ. And as a subagent of XYZ, right, we work with both buyers and sellers. So that's just a statement. And this is an area where Melissa called me and she does not want me to be her buyer's agent. So the only person that I could represent, as we said, is the seller by way of what we call a seller sub-agent. So let's say that ABC authorizes this. And so I enter the home and I show Melissa this house and we're walking through and she's oohing and ahhing. She loves it, right? This is the best house she's ever seen. She is so in love with it. And we get done with it. And she says, Seth, I love this house. I want to put an offer in on this house. Can I put in an offer for Melissa?
No. No, because you're not. She's not your client yet.
Yes, you can though, right?
She's the customer. You're still working for the seller. You can.
But you can.
You just wouldn't because they offered the seller sub agency.
I can, but remember who I'm representing. I can do it because I'm doing it because it helps the seller. If the seller gets an offer, the seller might be able to sell, right? So let's keep going with this. She says, Seth, I want to put an offer in. I say, great, Melissa, let's put an offer in. And she looks me in the eye. She says, okay, what should I offer? What am I going to tell her?
Take it to the listing price.
The listing price?
I can't give you any advice.
You know what I'm going to say? I'm going to say, oh, sweetness, why don't you go watch a couple more episodes of Selling Sunset? Maybe the answer's in there somewhere. How much you want to offer, girl? You tell me what you want to offer. But I understand this. I have no loyalties to her. Now, the rules state that for and I doubt this is going to be testable, but I want to tell you this because it seems like a good time. When we get into it later, the rules state that we could give an unrepresented party a list of unadjusted comps, meaning here's a list of similar homes that have sold recently. That's it. Not doing anything else. If she wanted that, I could give her that, right? Here's a list of homes who have sold in the area. But when we talk about a CMA, we did an adjustment to them to determine probable sales price. So that's something you do for a client. You would never give somebody a CMA as a customer. So remember, Melissa's a customer to me, right? Remember what we said. Customers, we owe honesty and fairness only. That's it. So I'm not going to lie to her. I would owe her material facts disclosure. Remember that term, material facts? If I knew any, I would have to sing like a bird because material facts supersedes old car. And so Melissa's like, you know what, Seth, whatever, all right? I don't need your help anyway. I know I said I didn't need an agent. I want you, And so here's what Melissa says. Melissa says, well, okay. What's it listed at? Seth, can you at least tell me that? And I said, sure, Melissa, I'm happy to. It's listed at $425. She says, okay, $425. And she starts thinking out loud. She's like, okay, $425. I know the market's kind of, in a weird place. I need this house. I love it. It's the best house ever. If I had to, I'd go up to $450, but I really think I can probably get this for $400,000. She said, Seth, I think I want to do $400,000. I'm sitting there talking with her. I said, okay, $400,000 is what you'd like to offer, Melissa. Is that right? She says, yes. So she tells me everything she wants on this offer, and I will write it up. Okay? Now let me give this role to somebody. Erica is going to be my listing agent. So Erica is the licensee that works for ABC and works directly with the seller. So let me explain something to you. I'm going to get this offer put together, and I'm going to pick up the phone. I'm going to call Erica. What do you think I'm going to tell you, Erica?
That she'll go up to $450.
Folks, here's how the conversation is going to go. Hey, Erica, it's Seth. I've got an offer for our seller client. Listen, it's some chick named Melissa, the one I told you about earlier, and she put in an offer for $375, but she said that she would go up to $450. So tell the seller to put a strike through on that offer and counter at $450. And Erica says, bet. So she goes to the seller, they put all the strike throughs, they change it, they counter offer at $450, and they send it back. Now here's how this is gonna go, okay? I'm gonna say, Melissa, good news. We got a counter offer on that house that the offer I put in for you. She's like, great, what was it? And I said, $450. And she's gonna sit there dumbfounded for a second. She's gonna be like, that's the max I said I'd go. Seth, what? That's oddly specific. How do they know to go to $450? I'm going to do this number right here, right? I'm going to say, because I told them to, Melissa. I told you. I didn't represent you. I was going to take you to the cleaners. Should have watched more episodes of TV shows. Because she's a customer. You don't tell an agent confidential information if you are a customer. Because I told you on day one of this class, we will use and abuse a customer. We will wring them out to dry. What you got, Ann?
Really tell her that.
How is the role that you just described as a seller subagent, how is that any different than just being a licensed real estate broker who is available to be hired as a buyer's agent and would show the house as such if he or she were hired in that fashion? Why are you called a seller subagent? What, am I missing something?
Well, you just articulated it exceptionally wrong. You said, how is that different than somebody who would show the house as a buyer's agent? The difference is loyalties, Ann. Who are you loyal to?
Why are you loyal? Why are you loyal to the seller? Because
Because you have to be loyal to somebody. You got to think where this started. Remember, I told you, for the past 100 years, sellers always had representation. Buyer agency wasn't a thing until 1996. So we always represented the sellers until that point. So it's still an option for everybody in the transaction to represent the seller, just like it was done 100 years ago. But there is an option for a buyer to have representation. There is an option in some states for nobody to have representation. And to answer your question the best way I possibly can, why wouldn't Melissa hire me is the better question.
Yeah. So, I mean, playing this out in the real world, say, Keller Williams has a listing. How does that typically work in terms of identifying or approving seller sub-agents? Is it just like, I'm a little bit confused on how that like plays out. I guess I understand it in theory. Like, is that just how it always is? Like, everyone's a seller subagent unless a buyer wants to hire them?
Cooperation with / compensation to other firms. Firm has advised seller of firm's company policies regarding cooperation and the amounts of any compensation that will be offered to other brokers, including but not limited to seller subagents, buyer agents, or both, brokers who do or do not participate in a listing service, and brokers who are or are not realtors. Seller authorizes the firm to compensate seller subagents with 2.4%, compensate buyer agents with 2.4%. Whoever brings us the buyer, whether they be a seller subagent or buyer's agent, we will compensate and work with. However, could the seller say, no, I do not want a seller subagent? Could we say as a firm that we don't work with seller subagents? And here's the thing. I think what you want to hear is this. This is exceptionally uncommon. It almost never happens in the real world, but it is a testable concept. Let me tell you why it almost never happens. If you go back to the relationships, right? ABC, XYZ. Well, Erica was the agent, right? And it doesn't matter who the seller is, but the seller hired Erica, who they presumably knew, liked, and trusted, and ABC. You agree? That's who they hired. Yeah. Well, ABC, if they agree to work with a seller subagent, do they know anything about my skills as a broker? Do they know anything about my firm's practices and training? No. Could I be a moron with a capital M? Could be. So here's what you have to understand. We very seldom allow this because of a term called vicarious liability. If I screw up and don't understand my role, I could cause damages to both the customer by not treating them right. I could cause damages to the seller by not doing something right. And even though ABC and Erica did nothing wrong, could they be tied up in the lawsuit as well? Because they allowed me to represent their seller. But please understand that seller subagency is exceptionally legal. It is exceptionally okay. But it doesn't happen that often. But that's not what they're going to ask you on the test. They're going to give you a seller subagency relationship, and you have to know who your loyalties are to, what your role is, what your obligations are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and you can also, didn't we also, were we also taught about the definition of a seller subagent really being like any other agent of the firm that the seller has hired?
Well, and here's where you have to have this distinction, because subagent and seller subagent are different.
Oh, bless. My gosh.
Think about it, okay? Hang tight. Listen for a second. Who is the listing agent in this scenario on this screen?
ABC.
Erica.
No.
ABC.
ABC. That's what I'm looking for, right? The agent is the firm. So Erica and every single person, let's say half of you in here work for ABC. Half of you in here are subagents of ABC. Okay? Now here's the deal. I work for XYZ, who's representing a buyer. I'm a subagent of XYZ, you agree? And the other half of you are affiliated with my firm. So now half of you are subagents of the buyer. When I just say the word subagent, we mean agent of the agent. Could be buyer, could be seller. But there's no such thing as a buyer subagent except for within your firm. But seller subagents could span to another firm like I just showed you. That's the difference. If you just say just the word subagent, it's typically talking about a licensee of a firm, not a relationship. Doesn't have to be seller, doesn't have to be buyer. Could be both, could be either. When I say seller subagent, it literally means you are either of the same firm representing the seller, or you could be outside the firm still representing the seller. But this would not happen. You could not go outside of the firm for a buyer subagency. That's not a thing. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. What you got, Brandy?
That was exactly, I was trying to clarify because, we go back and we watch these other videos, obviously, and I have not heard that distinction at all. So I was trying to make sure that this whole subagent that I have heard Travis refer to there is a distinction, and I need to write that down. Like, that's important. I don't know if it's going to be on the test or anything, but when
it
I
is
subagent, I was literally thinking it's just an agent of the firm. I've never heard what you just said on any video I've watched thus far.
Let me show you something.
Okay, please do.
Remember the syllabus that I keep coming back to. Oh, did I go too far? Hold on. Listing company can refuse to offer subagency to the other company. Switching from seller subagent to buyer agent. They are on the syllabus, which means they can be on your test. It is very important, and this is where I am always going to give you more information, even if you don't need it, because there is a question in section 3.4, a quiz question, that is actually legally wrong. And I will explain that in just a second. Let me finish answering these questions, and I promise that's why I'm doing this. I think these slides, if you just listen to me to explain it to you, I can get you there. And then when you see these slides, it'll make more sense. Patrick, what you got?
You mentioned that seller subagency is often not accepted by firms because of vicarious liability, but is it more common that they would allow or offer a referral fee in that scenario?
Yeah, because there's no liability for a referral fee. Patrick, that's a great question. Let me expand on this, okay? So you can all understand the distinction here. And I'm going to use Anne as an example because she's, was the one that kind of brought this up, okay? So I'm going to put a firm name again, all right? So Anne works for ABC. And ABC only works with sellers, okay? So she is hired by the owner of 123 Main Street. And if we want to get technical, ABC is the agent and Ann is a subagent of ABC. Everybody good? Okay. Well, what if they had desk duty at that firm and Natalia was sitting at the desk? And somebody says, hey, I saw Ann and ABC's listing at 123 Main Street, and I'd like to see it. Can Natalia go show this buyer ABC's listing at 123 Main Street?
Yes.
Of course she can.
She's a buyer customer.
You're right. Can she represent that buyer?
No.
No, because the firm doesn't work with buyers. That would not be possible. So she would be showing the home to the buyer as a what?
Customer.
Well, the buyer's a customer, but what is Natalia? A seller subagent. Folks, a seller subagent can be utilized in-house or cooperating brokerage firms. Because Ann is a subagent of ABC, and so basically it's ABC's the listing agent, Ann is a subagent of ABC, and now Natalia is an agent of Ann. So she would be a seller subagent. No matter how many layers you go down, everybody's loyalties are to one person and one person only, the seller. Which makes it what? The seller has what?
Single, exclusive.
Exclusive representation. There is no realm where your loyalties would ever not be to the seller. Huzzah!
Would it be true to say that the seller sub-agency can only occur when, like in a transaction, when you're getting ready to go on a contract or so?
Yeah, the one distinction I want to make, Tiffany, you can't be doing anything. You can't even list the home. You can't market it unless you have an agency agreement, because that's brokerage activities. So technically, the second you sign a listing agreement, subagency could be happening internally on your firm, right? Because maybe there's multiple people assisting the seller, and so they would all be seller subagents. Everybody has loyalties to the seller. But from a cooperating brokerage point of view, seller subagency couldn't happen until there was a buyer who was unrepresented that was working with another firm with the authority of ABC to also represent the seller. The biggest thing is always about the relationships. Because let me take Natalia out of this just so we can just take this one step further to make sure you're all good. Well, yet again, ABC only works with listings. And so, if I get a phone call and I'm back with XYZ and I have somebody who wants to see 123 Main Street. Well, let's say they sign a buyer agency agreement with me. This buyer has exclusive representation and I'm going to take them to this listing. And there's never a conflict of interest because Ann and all of ABC is loyal to the seller and me and all of XYZ is loyal to the buyer. You agree? But it is only if and only if, a cooperating firm meets a buyer who refuses to let us be their buyer's agent. And if and only if the listing firm authorizes it, then we could work with a buyer and assist the buyer with no loyalties to the buyer. But remember, in North Carolina, we have to be loyal to somebody. So that would be cooperating seller subagency. It would span over to another firm. Now, let me tell you the question that is legally wrong on Learn, Test, Pass. In section 3.4, the quiz, and who knows, it may have been changed after I pointed it out. I screenshotted it. Here's what it says. Which of the following statements is true regarding dual agency transaction in North Carolina? And there was A, B, right? Two different options. And then C was both are true, D was neither are true. And let me read to you what A says. It says, brokers and firms who sign a buyer agency agreement after showing the property to the buyer as a subagent of the seller are dual agents. I'm going to say that again. Brokers and firms who sign a buyer agency agreement after first showing the property to the buyer as a subagent of the seller are dual agents. That's not true. What that statement implies that the only type of seller subagency that exists is in-house. It doesn't. Seller subagency transverses cooperating brokerages. I just showed you that. So you could have been showing it as a seller subagent of XYZ, right? So if I show you a home, let's go back to the scenario with Melissa. This is, and then Eric, I'm going to get your question, but I need you to understand this because it's right here on the syllabus, which means you're going to be tested on the North Carolina piece. If I go back to Melissa and I say, Melissa, they countered at 450. Is Melissa going to be happy about that when I took her to the cleaners? No. So let's imagine that Melissa says, well, I changed my mind, Seth. I want you to be my buyer's agent now. I want you to represent me and I want you to fix it. Legally, I can if I get permission from the seller. So let's just say that now it's me and, Melissa and then Ann's the listing agent, right? Different person than the scenario before. So I'm going to go to Ann. I'm going to say, Ann, hey, listen, remember how we took this chick to the cleaners, right? Because I changed the person. I don't remember who it was before. And Ann's like, yeah. I said, well, listen, she's mad about it. She wants to know if I can be her buyer's agent. Will you just ask the seller if they have a problem with it? What's the first and only thing the seller is going to ask Ann?
Is it okay?
Yeah. Is there any reason I shouldn't let this happen? You know what Ann's probably going to say? No. The damage has been done. We were going to pay Seth anyway. We never told him any secrets. He just told us secrets. Fundamentally, there's no difference to you, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. Let it happen. So now I would sign a buyer agency agreement with Melissa. And so I'm not a dual agent, am I? Because ABC represents the seller and XYZ represents the buyer. So fundamentally, that question is false. Now, has the damage been done? Presumably, but could I try to amend it right by playing hardball? Well, and I know she said she'd go up to $450, but now that I'm her agent, she's telling me she's about to walk if you think that she's paying $450, right? Here's the thing that doesn't make sense. Is that exceptionally dangerous for Melissa? Yes, right? To go back and forth, it's literally like, here's a football analogy again, Tom Brady switching to throw for the Panthers in the middle of the Bucks-Panthers game. He knows all the plays. Do you think the head coach of the Buccaneers is going to let that happen? No, but if he did, could it happen? Sure. It's just dangerous because the loyalties have switched. Just let it sink in for a second. Erica, let me answer your question and then I'll keep going with this. Just let it sink in. Nope, you're muted.
I didn't have a question. I'm sorry.
Oh, I apologize. I thought your hand was up. Patrick, did I answer yours already, right? Yours was just up from before, right? Yeah. Now, let me take this a step further, okay? Because you have to know it the other way too. Remember, I told you that you can operate under an oral buyer agency agreement. We had a good laugh at that before we went to lunch. And I told you that they were two things, right? What is an oral buyer agency agreement? Like, what are the two things that you need to remember that they are?
Not binding.
Non-exclusive, right? You cannot bind them to you. They can go have as many relationships with many other brokers as they want.
Open-ended.
And open-ended. There is no time frame. They're just going until they're not. This is the kind that Lisa would like, right? Because Lisa can just walk away from it. It's not a contract, right? It's not binding. So you can just be like, I'm out, right? I don't like you. I hate your guts. That's the kind you can get out of. An oral buyer agency agreement. But I told you something. Let's see if you caught it. When would you have to put that oral buyer agency agreement in writing?
Right when they're making an offer.
Before you put an offer in, and just as a point of clarity, you would also have to put it in writing if you wanted to bind them to you only. If you wanted to make it Facebook official, right? We wanted to make it exclusive. You could put it in writing. That's all it takes to bind them to you. But you're right. The biggest thing to remember is in order for you to put in an offer for them, you have to have a written buyer agency agreement. Well, let me use a new person, but give a very similar scenario. Brittany Jones. Okay, Brittany Jones. Because you're right in the middle of my screen. Brittany Jones calls me up, and I'm just using the example of Zillow, folks. I promise Zillow's not in the test. It's just relatable for you, okay? Brittany Jones finds me on Zillow. She calls me up. She says, Seth, you look like the best agent in the world. I saw you on Zillow. And I say, Brittany, I am. You're right. You're not wrong, okay? And so she wants to put an offer in on 123 Main Street. By the way, I'm not very creative, so it's always 123 Main Street, okay? Just live with it. So I meet Brittany at 123 Main Street, and I go over the agency disclosure with Brittany, and Brittany elects to work with me as a buyer's agent, but it's an oral buyer agency agreement. Is she my client?
Yes.
Yes, she is, right? I have to provide her old car. I'm giving her legal advice. I'm looking out for her, right? Obedience, lawful disclosure, all of it, okay? Loyalties. She's my client. Now, she's not bound to me in an oral buyer agency agreement, right? She can go out and have relationships with other people. I can't stop her. But she is my client. So I'm showing her homes, And she's oohing and eyeing, and she loves the house. And we get through looking at a house, and she's like, Seth, I love this house. This is the house I need. I want to put in an offer. And she asked me for advice. I'm going to give it to her, aren't I? She's my person. I have to. She's my client. Understand that we would have to reduce it to writing before I could actually put this offer together. But yes, we could talk about the terms first. So am I going to give her advice? Absolutely. And she's going to tell me what she's pre-approved for. She's going to tell me how much money she has in the bank. She's going to tell me what she would offer, what's her highest, what she wants to start with. And we can all agree that's not dangerous, is it? Because I owe her confidentiality, loyalty, right? All of that jazz. Everybody agree? Let me paint a picture for you. After I give her this advice, Brittany and I have a discussion. And I said, all right, Brittany, I think we got this all worked out. Let's put that offer in, girl. And she says, great, what's the first step? And I say, well, Brittany, remember we were operating under an oral buyer agency agreement. So now we have to have a written buyer agency agreement. And it goes like this. Brittany's like, oh, a written one. Written buyer agency agreement. She starts looking around and said, Brittany, everything okay? She's like, yeah, it's just, everything's fine. It's just that I have commitment issues and I don't want a written buyer agency agreement with you, Seth. I'm going to look at her and I say, Brittany, sweetness, baby girl, listen to me, okay? I can't write this offer for you unless you sign this buyer agency agreement, this written one. She's like, okay, yeah, all right, I get it. Nope, I don't want to sign it. Brittany, if you don't sign this, I can't help you. You can't put the offer in for me if I don't sign it? No. Well, not as your agent, Brittany. So if Brittany refuses to sign it, could I put an offer in for her still?
Yes, you could.
Yes. Seller
You don't owe her that.
Oh, there you go. As a seller subagent. Folks, I just pulled the Tom Brady starts playing for the Panthers. She told me all her plays in confidence with no issues. But when she wouldn't reduce it to writing, she's not my person anymore. Can I put the offer in for her? Yes, as a seller subagent. That is a dangerous thing. So yet again, could you switch from a buyer's agent to a seller subagent? You could, with disclosure and permission from all parties. So I'd say, Brittany, I'm begging you not to do this. I'm going to take advantage of you, girl. And then I'd go to the listing agent and say, can I be a seller subagent? I know all the buyer's secrets. And if they say yes, I can switch teams. And I'm going to tell all of Brittany's secrets to the seller. And she's going to be screwed.
Now, do you have to get written permission from the seller to be a seller subagent under them?
Yeah, I mean, they would have to authorize it first and foremost in that listing agreement we looked at, right? Yeah. And so you would just need permission to switch teams. Permission doesn't have to necessarily be in writing, but even if it's not required by rule, is it a good idea to always get it in writing? Yeah, absolutely. What you got, Lisa?
So I'm confused. If she doesn't want to put the relationship on paper, you still have committed to her orally that you are her person, but all of a sudden you can go give all of her secrets, even though that there was an oral agreement saying that you wouldn't give her secrets away?
Well, Lisa, think about it for a second. There's another answer to this, because I have to represent somebody in order to put in an offer, in order to show homes. I showed homes as her buyer's agent, so that was no problem. You agree? Mm-hmm. Okay. But I also told you by rule, I can't put in an offer for a buyer as their agent unless I have a written buyer agency agreement. You agree? Mm-hmm. So when she wouldn't sign it, I can't put in an offer for her as her buyer client or as her buyer agent and her being my client. But legally speaking, I could still put an offer in for her if I represented somebody. So yet again, if it's not the buyer, who's the only other person I could represent?
So does she have to release you? as the in the oral agreement? Does she say, okay, well, you can go represent the buyer. I still want you to do the contract.
Well, I would have to make sure she understood these ramifications. I'm like, Brittany, remember, I told you I owe you this stuff as long as I'm your agent. If you don't sign this, I'm not your agent. So please understand that I will share your secrets. But here's the thing you're missing, Lisa. Does she have to continue to work with me?
No.
No. Couldn't she just walk away and the deal never happened and then my information is useless?
Exactly. Well, that's the thing. Like you, in the whole process, you want to stay with the deal because you know that she's ready to make an offer. So you want their cut of the pie.
Mm-hmm.
So.
But don't focus on that.
No.
Don't focus on that because if she doesn't want me to reduce it to writing, I can't be her buyer's agent anymore. The only realm, and this is what you have to understand. If the test question says, could I still put an offer in for her? The answer is yeah, as a seller sub-agent. Please understand that it's not about who's paying me. That's not what's going to be on the test questions, right? And if she doesn't want me to be her buyer's agent, doesn't want to reduce it to writing, and I tell her how dangerous it is, and she doesn't want me to put an offer in, I'm going to go home and take a nap. I'm not in it.
Oh, okay. So if she says, okay, don't put an offer. I don't want to work with you at all. Blah, blah, blah. Are you still committed to the secret she's told you?
I'm not going to. Here's the thing. You cannot go out of your way to harm a past client. I need everybody to understand this right now. We are not going out of our way to share this to the public. I'm not going to go put it on like a Facebook chat about all of Brittany's qualifications for buying. Okay? We're not. The only time that I'd be expected to use that information is if my loyalties, my allegiances have changed. If she's turned to a customer and that information would benefit a client, I would have to use it. Let me make a statement here. Listen carefully. You can never disclose clients' confidential information. Now I'm going to make another statement. You have to disclose customer confidential information to your client. If you know information about a customer that could benefit your client, you have to tell your client. But if you know confidential information about your client, you would never tell anybody because of old car. We owe them, clients, confidentiality. We do not owe customers confidentiality. That is a very important statement to process. That's why the agency disclosure is so important. Lisa, wasn't you that called it the Miranda rights?
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. Because when I met Brittany, you have the right to remain silent. Don't tell me your secrets unless I'm going to represent you. Do you understand that, Brittany? She said, yes. Because I owe you all of these things so long as I'm your agent. And then she agreed for me to be her agent, albeit orally. So then it was okay for her to tell me her secrets. But then she, like a silly goose in a silly little pond, severed our relationship by not reducing it to writing. She turned herself back into a customer. But to the point, I may not be in the transaction anymore. If she says, well, screw this, I don't want you to put an offer in because I'm screwed now, I just go away. She can find somebody else. She can buy the house. She can not buy the house. I don't care. Everybody with me? Now this is why, and like I said, I know y'all have so many questions and we've gone on some tangents, but please understand that this is what I warned you of on day one. This is the hardest section in the entire syllabus. The benefit to you, right? It's a benefit and a detriment. Because you're going to get more confused first. But the fact of the matter is, as I bring more light and more light and more light and you start grasping it, we'll have 5 more weeks to talk about it as opposed to just a couple weeks to talk about it. So you will hear me use all these terminologies in a million different ways that will go along with what you're learning for the rest of this course. Pia, she became a client when she agreed to an oral buyer agency agreement. Remember what I told you, oral buyer agency agreements are express. So what it looked like is, Brittany, I will be your buyer's agent. We will look for homes in this surrounding area. If you want to put in an offer, we would have to reduce it to a written buyer agency agreement. I can't bind you to any time, and if I get you under contract after we have a written agency agreement, I expect to make X or Y%. And then I would also look for dual agency authorization from her from an oral capacity if she wanted to see any listings listed by my firm. That's it. Erica says, is a buyer agency agreement something to have on hand? Sure. Although, do understand that the reason they exist in such an oral capacity is because sometimes people are uncomfortable signing, right? They may be very uncomfortable signing something when they first meet you. And that's why I like to compare it to dating. You got to get to know somebody. See if we have a connection before I bind myself to you. Or you bind yourself to me. Whatever, right? So there's so many important things that you need to look for in test questions. Like the word client and customer. Like the word subagent, right? Like listing firm versus buying firm versus selling firm. There's always going to be a lot of scenarios and things that you have to filter through, right? But you've got to have a good foundational understanding of how these things all work. Brittany said it's like test driving a car before buying. Yeah, it's exactly like that, right? So let me take this a step further, because in a typical curriculum, it typically goes, we talk about agency, then we talk about agency contracts, then we talk about contracts in general, then we talk about actual sales contracts that we utilize in the state of North Carolina. Ours goes a little bit differently, which is why I'm just giving you a whole bunch of information to help you grasp things as we move forward. So, when we're dealing with these relationships, let me tell you something that's very important. And it seems silly to tell you this, but trust me, students mess up on this all the time. You always need to be thinking about the parties in a relationship. So let me show you what I mean. If I say a listing agreement, who are the parties to a listing agreement?
Seller.
Seller and seller's agent.
I need a better word.
Listing agent.
Yep, listing agent, okay. Seller and listing agent, and then let me ask one more question. Who is the agent? There you go. So if I say listing agreement, the parties are the seller of real property and a firm. Or sole proprietor, but think firm, right? Default to firm. Everybody okay with that statement? If I say buyer agency agreement, who are the parties?
Either for buyer and the buyer firm.
Buyer of real property and the firm, right? Representing the buyer. Everybody agree? If I say property management agreement, who are the parties?
Property manager. They're the manager.
Owner. Manager.
Property owner and the broker property manager, right? If I say, and think about this one for a second, a tenant representation contract, who are the parties?
The property manager and the tenant.
Tenant's representative.
A tenant and presumably an agent, right? Because a tenant representation, that means we're giving representation to a tenant. So tenant and an agent, tenant and the firm, tenant and broker. And that one's not as testable. I just like to throw you that curveball there because it does show up here. Okay, how about a sales contract? Who are the parties to a sales contract?
Buyer.
Buyer and the seller. Folks, it seems silly that I just took you step by step through this, but one word changes the entirety of the question. So you have to be very careful. Who are we talking about? Who are the parties? What relationship that exists, right? A lot of different things to be aware of as we go through these. Well, let me go ahead and explain agency disclosure in North Carolina. And I'm going to actually pull up the agency disclosure. I think now's a good time to do this because it's also going to teach you dual agency to the umpteenth degree. I think we're starting to grasp this concept of exclusive buyer agency, right? Meaning loyalties are only to the buyer. And exclusive seller agency, meaning loyalties are only to the seller, right? That's what exclusive from us to them means. We're only looking after their best interest. So I'm going to pull up the offer to purchase. I'm just another offer to purchase. We're not there yet. The working with the real estate agent's disclosure. And before I read anything on there, I'm going to give you another story time, and I'm going to show you exactly what it looks like. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to do you one better. I'm going to pull it up on the Real Estate Commission's website, because then I can show you another resource too that will help you. I promise it will help you. Zoom in so all you can see is the very top of it, because I don't want you to have any secrets yet, because I want to talk you through stuff so you don't get antsy here. All right. Here is the working with real estate agents disclosure. And it changed a lot. If you look at any of the old textbooks, right? I think maybe Eric had the old textbook. If you look through that textbook, the Working Modern Real Estate Practice in North Carolina, the Dearborn one, there is a brochure. It used to be called the Working with Real Estate Agents brochure. Now we call it the Working with Real Estate Agents disclosure. But based on your time here in this class, last week and this week, you're 2.5 days in, almost 3 days in. Do you see why it would be so important to explain to the public how these relationships work? Did you have any clue that we were told by the Real Estate Commission to take you to the cleaners if you don't work with us? You agree that this is important then, yes? Because how could you possibly protect yourself if you didn't know that we were out to get you from the word go? It's the same reason the Miranda rights exist. You don't have to confess to the police that you shot somebody in the head. The courts get to decide if you're guilty, not that cop, right? That's kind of a morbid example, but you get what I'm saying. So, here's the reason why I want to give you a story time first, okay? I want you to think about dual agency. Somebody help me out. Define dual agency how I defined it.
Dual agency,
One firm.
one
In
firm,
transaction.
Seller, one firm.
You nailed it, except I need one more little piece. So somebody said, there you go. That's the piece. It's a real estate firm, better yet, let's say a brokerage, representing the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. Everybody okay with that statement? Here's why this is so important. You folks are endeavoring to be a licensee, a broker, right? A real estate agent. And so most of you want to think about what you are going to do, what you are going to be. And I hate to take you down a couple pegs. It's not about you, sweetness. It's about the firm. A lot of people get confused and think that it's one licensee working with the buyer and the seller. It's not. Could it be? Yes. Let me make a statement. Let me pick some new people. If Zay is selling a home, there he is, and he hires me, and Khan wants to buy a home, and she hires me. Oh, I just lost you that fast. Khan, where'd you go? Oh, there you are. Okay, there's Khan. So, we got Zay and Khan. Zay selling a home, Khan's buying a home. Could I, with permission of both of them, work on behalf of both Khan and Zay? Yeah.
With designated dual agent.
Not designated. I need y'all to stop using that word because you're reading ahead, and I love that. But designated is a dangerous word that you cannot get wrong. And some of you have already used it wrong multiple times. So please be careful. Let's talk about this. If I was to give you a scenario, okay, and I'm gonna take me out of it. Y'all can see my screen right here, right? Okay. So here's the thing. We've got Con buying, and we've got Zay. I was looking how to spell it, but Z-A-Y is what you got. Con selling, or I'm sorry, Zay selling. Everybody good with that? Okay. Well, Angie. You're going to be the agent, okay? They hired you, Angie, not me. So picture this, Angie. You work for ABC, because I'm super creative. Well, remember how I told you these relationships form? She could have been working with what? Zay for 6 months and Con for 3. Con for 6, Zay for 2. You agree that we have no idea how long they've had a relationship, right? Well, Angie would be exclusively representing Zay so long as no members of her firm wanted to see the home, and she would be exclusively representing Con so long as Con wanted to see other listings. But now what we're talking about is Con wants to buy Zay's house, and Angie's representing them both. Let me give you a scenario to help you understand exactly how dual agency works. I'm going to give you an epiphany. Because Con hired Angie, we can say that Con is Angie's client, yes? So we can say that Con could sing like a bird and tell Angie all her secrets, right? Because Angie owes her old car. So she can tell Angie that she's got $800,000 in the bank. She can tell Angie that she needs to be under contract for a work relocation in the next 3 weeks. She can tell Angie, any personal stuff she wants. You agree? Well, if Angie's also representing Zay, then Angie owes Zay old car as well, which means Zay can tell Angie how much he expects to make on the house, what his loan payoff is, that the reason he's selling is because he's going through a nasty divorce, right? Zay can tell Angie all of his secrets. You agree? So let me go back to the dumbing down of buyer agency and seller agency. What is a buyer agent's job in the most simplest, stupidest way that you can tell me it? What is their job?
Get the house at the best price possible.
Get somebody a house they want at the best price possible. I agree. What about the stupidest, simplest way that you can think of a listing agent? Somebody representing a seller.
For as much money.
Sell the stinking house and give them the most money possible. So now, Angie's representing, with permission, by the way, both Con and Zay in the same transaction. Con wants to buy Zay's house. Picture it. Angie knows that Zay has listed the house at $425, but that he would be happy with $375. Angie knows that Con has $800,000 sitting in the bank, but would be overjoyed if she only had to pay, $375. So here's my question to you, Angie. Con says, I love this house that you have listed of Zay's. Angie, I want to put an offer in on that house. Angie, what should we offer on this listing?
She can't say it.
Wouldn't be able to give any advice. I would be misrepresenting both of them.
She says she wouldn't be able to give any advice because she would be misrepresenting or breaching her fiduciary duties, right? Can we agree that if Angie tells Con how to good deal, then she has hurt Zay? That was not okay. Because in North Carolina, we've promised to take care of both of you. If we help one, we hurt the other. Does that make sense? When we say dual agency, you are bound and gagged, okay? You can't say anything. Also, just to make sure you are paying attention, I'll tell you something funny. Every time I give that comparison, I say bound and gag, there's a couple of you freaks who get a little excited, right? You get this, it's like, ooh, don't get spankings too. And I'm like, calm down, this is pre-licensing, get your life together. And it happens. Every class, people smile.
I was thinking of Pulp Fiction.
But there you go, you know? I'm telling you, I teach us. So here's the thing. Everybody's understanding what happens here, right? She can't give advice. If she helps one, she hurts the other. You agree? That's dual agency. Let me change something for you, though. Just to really paint a picture. Now we've got Angie working directly with Zay. And we've got... and I'm sorry, you go by a nickname. Eileen, you just go by what? Imee, yep. So we got Imee working directly with Con, okay? They both work for ABC. So let me just ask y'all a question. Now that we've gotten rid of Angie by herself, right? Con is being represented or working directly with Imee, and Zay is working directly with Angie, okay? Well, Con comes to you, Imee, and she says, all right, what should I offer on this property?
$375.
Imee wants to offer $375 because that, you know, I guess because of this number right here, right? Con would be ecstatic if she got a home for $375. You feel good about that? Okay. Well, we put in this offer for $375, and now it comes over to Angie's desk, and Angie gets it and takes it to Zay. And she says, well, Zay, we got an offer for $375, you know? And Zay says, okay, well, what do you think we should do with it, Angie? You think we should take it, or you think we should counter?
Counter.
Counter? Okay. And let's just say that...
She can say, right? She can't tell him. She can't give him advice on information she found out prior to this exclusive.
Well, and so here's the thing. She doesn't know it yet. I've taken her out. She doesn't know anything about Con. Okay? This is a different scenario.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. You're absolutely right. Here's the thing. So, Zay, you want to counter? Go higher, yeah? Okay. So we're going to give some advice, and Angie's going to give some advice to counter at $425. Let me change one more thing. And this is a build-up. So I want you to understand that a couple scenarios are happening for me to get you to understand some concepts here. Let me change something, okay? Con met Imee 3 weeks ago. Angie's been working with Zay for 4 weeks. And 3 weeks ago, they were sitting in the break room at ABC Realty, chit-chatting with each other. And Angie's eating some Cheetos, and Imee's eating a ham sandwich, okay? And they're just chit-chatting. And Angie says something to this effect. Oh, man, that house I got listed for my client, Zay, it's such a pretty house. We just have not been having any luck with offers. We've got it listed at $425, which I think it could bear that price, but he'd be ecstatic with $375. She says that, okay? And Imee says, well, hey, girl, I know exactly what you mean. I got a buyer who's got $800,000 in cash in the bank. And this chica is so specific on the house she wants that she's not even put in a single offer. I've shown her 62 houses, and she hasn't even put in a single offer. We're looking around the $400 price range because she wants to stick to $375, even though she's got all this money in the bank. And they both have this conversation, and then they move on with their lives, right? They're like, yeah, sucks to suck, right? And then they move on with their lives. Now picture this. Imee gets a phone call from Con after she leaves the office that day. And Con says something to this effect. Imee, oh my God, you're not going to believe this. I found the house. It's the one. I know we've seen 600 houses, Imee, but this is the one. And Imee says, great, what's the address? And Colin says 123 Main Street, because it always is, right? And Imee's like, why does that sound familiar, 123 Main Street? And it's Zay's house, the one that she just was talking to Angie about, Everybody see what's happening here? So now, Amy goes and she meets Khan at the house. She shows the house. And now, knowing everything that you know, I'm going to ask you a question. Khan looks at Amy and she says, what should I offer on this property? So when Khan asks Amy, what are we going to say?
375.
375.
You're gonna say I can't say anything because you know information. You can't.
They both hired by the same firm, so they can't give it
Better
out.
go agency.
It's just I believe the right thing is that it's just a conflict of interest because you have this information. You're required by law to give it to someone, but you got it prior to the buyer agency agreement. So how does?
But although you have the information, now you have two representatives. You have Amy representing Khan and Angie representing Zay. So Amy owes, Okar to Khan. Amy owes Okar to Zay. So isn't Amy able now to give Khan advice as to what it is that she should do?
Here's the epiphany I have to give you all. And this is why some of the verbiage I've used has been so specific. Who is Khan's agent?
ABC.
ABC.
Who is Zay's agent?
ABC.
ABC. This is no different than when it was just Angie. Because Angie knew both of their secrets, but she couldn't use it because she promised to help them both. If she helps one, she hurts the other. This is why you've got to think of the firm. Dual agency is not about the licensees. That means nothing. It's about this. ABC was hired to represent the best interest of Khan, but ABC was also hired to represent the best interest of Zay. If we help Khan, we hurt Zay. If we help Zay, we hurt Khan. Now let me tell you the truth about dual agency. It is the most worthless hunk of junk that ever existed in the entire world. You are useless. And I feel like I'm about to give you a mental breakdown with all this stuff. Like you look like you're just like I'm playing with your emotions.
I'm just always too expressive. I'm good.
Okay, all right. Okay.
but thank you for your.
Yeah, I was making sure. All right, just making sure. Folks, does that make sense to you? You have to approach it this way on the test. I promise you. Let me give you a test question here. Angie is assisting buyer A in purchasing a home listed by ABC, where Angie is also affiliated. She is putting in an offer with consent from both to act as dual agents in this transaction. Which of the following is true about the advice she should give buyer A? And if you answer that she should give them advice as their exclusive buyer's agent, you're wrong. She cannot advise anybody because even though it is IME, remember what we said for that subagents. Here's that word. IME is a subagent of ABC. Angie is a subagent of ABC, which means when we signed a listing agreement with Zay, even though IME wasn't part of it, IME also owed loyalties to Zay. And when we signed a buyer agency agreement with Khan, even though Angie wasn't a part of it, she owed loyalties to Khan because everybody in the firm is ABC. All of them. You're just an extension of them, right? Everybody is ABC. Folks, we don't refer to your individual cells as being separate from you, but we can all agree that there's a million billion cells that make up who you are. You are you, but all of those are also you. Now, let me introduce the word that you have all been chomping at the bit to hear. Designated. Please understand that designated does not mean there's two licensees. Designated has to take a step further, because what you're looking at right here, this is just dual. Two licensees, same firm with the buyer and the seller in the same transaction is dual. Angie, the one licensee working with the buyer and the seller in the same transaction, also just dual. Designated is where you give them specific instructions within the organization. Think of the BIC, the broker in charge, would come forward and they would look at Angie and Amy and say, since this is about to happen, here's what we're going to do. Angie, I want you to represent the best interest of Zay. And I want you to represent the best interest of Khan. It has to be specifically appointed. Now that we have specifically stated that we are doing designated, let me tell you the biggest epiphany. It works exactly like exclusive representation. It's an in-house transaction. You agree? Everybody is part of ABC, so it's dual. But of dual, we're practicing a specific type called designated. Let me articulate this the best way possible. It means go for blood. We have now given you permission. So here's what you need to think of designated as. We put Angie and Amy in a ring together and gave them both boxing gloves. And we're screaming, go for the kidneys from the sidelines while the rest of us fools are sitting out of it. We don't have a team. They do. What you got, Olga? And then I'm going to let y'all take your last break of the day.
I just wanted to check with you. Since they both have information, could they be designated?
No.
They cannot, right?
They cannot. Yeah, and for those of you who read ahead, I'm getting there, right? I just needed you to understand the concept before I told you the rules about it. But you're absolutely right, Olga. You're absolutely right. So y'all go take a break, 2:12 to 2:22, and then we're in the home stretch for the day, and I'm going to enlighten you as to the rest of the rules, and we'll be in good shape, okay?